All right, well, it's 1 o'clock Central, so we'll slowly get started here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are going to look at how to secure your ScreenConnect server with a reverse proxy and WAF. Principles today are going to apply to any proxy WAF solution out there, but along the way we will describe the automation theory proxy and WAF services. A couple points of business here. The webinar is being recorded, and we will have time for questions at the end. So feel free to make use of that Q&A box. We have a bit of a mixed audience today, so we're going to start with a bit of background, but by the end, we're going to get into plenty of the crunchy technical details. So without further ado, let's get started. To get some introductions out of the way, I'm Jeremy, the founder of Automation Theory. My firm specializes in MSP tool infrastructure, and we have a heavy focus in the on-prem ConnectWise products. We're a small firm, but we strive to take care of your tools so you can take care of your clients. Being a smaller firm, we know our clients and their needs really well, and we ourselves have skin in the infrastructure security game. We use the same technologies we show here to protect our own stacks and systems. With that out of the way, let's start talking about defending ScreenConnect and the crazy world that we do it in. We gave a talk last year at MSP GeekCon about defending MSP tools in what we call the zero-day world. And that idea encompasses both the crazy rate that zero-day vulnerabilities happen and the fire drill that most MSPs experience, where you drop everything, figure out who's vulnerable to this, figure out how to remediate or patch or mitigate these types of vulnerabilities. Back when we originally pulled the data for this slide last year, on average, you had a new crazy zero-day about once every 5 days. So at least weekly, on average, you were seeing something crazy. And as we talk about MSP tools, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there seems to be this pattern where you discover the vulnerability, it gets disclosed, and then you patch it, pray, and then everybody tells you to enable MFA on your MSP tools. This just isn't going to scale, and we do like to poke fun at the continual MFA guidance. We are big fans of strong authentication, but it seems like all of the security advice in our industry is so heavily geared on authentication that it just glosses over most everything else. That's what we're going to talk about more. We have some great stories from our client base. Once upon a time, one of our clients was doing a penetration test, and they actually found a vulnerability within ConnectWise Automate. They went to ConnectWise and said, hey, our pen testers found this, and it took 4 months for that patch to get released, and initially they wanted more development time for that patch. That's simply, the name of the game, where vendors can't produce patches instantly, and so we need to look at defending our tool stacks, assuming that there's vulnerabilities to be had, and that, we might not know about it, but we don't want to keep playing the fire drill game. That's especially true with a lot of MSP tools, where you're always going to have a little bit of external exposure. It's going to vary tool to tool as far as how much needs to be open, what communicates on the internet, things like that. But you're always going to have a little bit of surface area. So with that, let's take a look at the anatomy of an attack and build our defenses around how the attackers will be attacking us. So this is a very common slide. If you've seen any of our other webinars, you've seen this before. And this is the Lockheed Martin cybersecurity kill chain. And in a nutshell, attacks follow different phases. You have different security technologies that protect you at these different phases. And today, we're concerned with the first 4 phases. The last 3 on this are covered by the security layers that are on the server, which are part and parcel to the MSP world, like your endpoint, your EDR, DNS filtering, SIM tools, things like that. In our previous webinars, we have covered in great detail the technical bits and bytes of reverse proxies and WAFs, and have shown the really crunchy technical examples for that. So we're going to skip over a little bit of that so we can have a focused discussion of ScreenConnect and the recent vulnerability. With that, reconnaissance was a huge part of the latest vulnerability. So let's go ahead and start there. Looking at basic attacks, once an attacker has an exploit, they need a target, and the reconnaissance phase begins. And the most common way to do this these days is with an IoT scanner like Shodan, as you see on the slide here. This was a basic Shodan search. We were looking for ScreenConnect with the default application title, which is customizable. There were a hair over 7,000 MSPs on the internet running ScreenConnect with the default title. Once you locate targets like this, it's pretty much an automated attack process. Shodan has an API, you can download those results and you feed it into a bot that will just start to query the IPs and try the exploits. Most people looking at this have a gut instinct that enumeration is bad, but it's kind of hard to put into words the exact problem and, really flesh out what that gut feeling means as far as IT security strategies and methodologies. But there's an analogy we like to use that really frames this in a more obvious way. This is one of our favorite graphics. You can see, comparing left to right, that you have the same technical offensive and defensive security layers, but they definitely are not equivalent. We like to say that the best security is a blend of armor and camouflage, just like militaries around the world use all the time. You can implement all your technical controls, but if it's enumerable, just like that pink army tank, you're going to get attacked first. Maybe your other security layers will protect you, and maybe not. But when you have a situation like we had last week with ScreenConnect, where you have an actively exploited vulnerability, the minutes matter, and staying out of the crosshairs long enough to get patched is the name of the game. One other point we like to clarify with this is that there's a difference between camouflage and security through obscurity. When we're camouflaging something, we're implementing technical controls that frustrate enumeration and the related attack methods. And it's not just changing trait details of a system, trying to just obfuscate it and randomize it. So there are a couple other high points on the topic of enumeration that we should cover before we get into the current vulnerability. So here's a detailed look at an enumerated ScreenConnect server. Screenshot from Shodan here. First things first, these guys did a good job. They patched their server. We can see that version number in the right-hand part of the screen there. And these guys are on the latest patch. And they also have a wildcard certificate. We'll talk more about that on the next slide. But there are some problems here. So the first one would be those leaking subdomains. You can see that on the left-hand side there, we can see a lab tech server, something that looks like an archive, and then another service, maybe the Lab Tech Solution Center, something like that, that are all sharing a certificate. So by exposing one server, we now have attack details on the rest of their application stack. We can also see that they're using some older, weaker TLS ciphers. You can also see all the header information, which is how we were able to enumerate this server as being a ScreenConnect server. It's worth noting that there are other ways to enumerate MSP tools, and it really depends on what we're looking for. But you can search for strings inside the HTML. You can search for those little favicons, certain certificate names for hosted services, or the ports that these applications run on. So right now we're picking on the HTTP header hardening of this application, but that's not the end-all be-all of security or enumeration as we explore this topic here. At the end of the day, these guys are patched, they're secure from this latest vulnerability, but when the next big vulnerability comes, they're going to repeat the patch, pray, and MFA fire drill. That's what we want to get away from when we think about standing up additional security layers in front of ScreenConnect servers. So let's go ahead and touch on subdomain enumeration since it was a big part of the recent attacks, and then we'll get into the fun technical items. So for attackers, DNS and certificate records are a go-to for finding attack surface. And that can be both a manual operation as well as an automated process. If you are, if your company website is msp.com and you run all your tools on that same domain, with every business card and email, you're handing out your attack surface. And that's obviously not good from an enumeration standpoint. And on the slide here, we see an example of an MSP in the Eastern US. From their website FQDN, we were able to find their ScreenConnect server, along with their VPN service and an FTP server that might also present some attack surface for them. And we'll talk about how to mitigate those issues later on. But for now, there's one more example that we should look at. So does anybody see the problem here? Feel free to hop into the chat. You can see it. I'll give you a minute. Okay, so we have a couple answers coming in, and yeah, you guys are hitting the nail on the head. The old ciphers, specifically SSL version 2. That almost has to be a Server 2008 R2 box. I won't go too crazy on this, but we do offer server migration services. And so if you have a ScreenConnect or a ConnectWise Automate server on old infrastructure that you need to be moved, we can help you with that because it's definitely time to get rid of your Server 2008 boxes. But while we're talking about this, I'd like to have a brief conversation on good cryptography. In the middle of all this vulnerability chaos, most of the other security best practices that we think about have just fallen by the wayside. And that's understandable, but we should reel things back in a little bit. So SSL version 2 was published in 1995, and it was so flawed that by 1996, SSL version 3 was released. Among my collection of old IT items, this is a floppy disk installer. This is disk 1 for Windows 95. I guarantee you nothing that shipped on a floppy disk needs to talk to your ScreenConnect server. If there are old ciphers, bad cryptography, it's time to get that cleaned up. As you can see on the screen here, the Qualys SSL Lab scanner fails this server with flying colors. Sometimes, in the MSP world, we're just kind of patching and updating cryptography. We're not really getting into the weeds of what are these cryptographic vulnerabilities and how bad are they and all that. But these ciphers are really old and ancient, and I honestly don't know how servers like that have skirted by vulnerability scanners or insurance company requirements, things like that. But it is still better. I'll kind of grit my teeth and say that it's better than the over 4,000 ScreenConnect servers that are still listening on plain text. It used to be, and it still kind of is, a chore to get a certificate configured on a ScreenConnect box. Have to do some strange command line work or use ConnectWise's little tool to do it. But if you are one of those 4,000 MSPs who needs help configuring a certificate, go ahead, let us know, free of charge. We will help you get a certificate on your ScreenConnect. So with that, now that we've covered our public service announcement about cryptography, let's get back to the actual vulnerability here. So the recent vulnerability stems from a maximum criticality vulnerability. Sorry, the recent exploit stems from a critical vulnerability, and it was paired with a second CVSS 8.4 vulnerability. The last time we saw a perfect 10.0 score with a known exploit was the VMware Spring Cloud vulnerability in 2022. I'd really advocate to treat your MSP tools like you'd treat your ESXi servers or your RDP ports. People back in 2022 thought it was crazy that, oh, hey, you have your VMware structure exposed to the public internet. Like, I don't think anybody on this call would plug in your ESXi login page straight to the internet. And if any of your clients came to you and said, hey, we want to open RDP to the world, but it's MFA, so it's fine, you'd probably kind of back them off the ledge slowly, maybe bring up like Eternal Blue or other vulnerabilities like in the protocol and explain that there are a lot better ways to handle that, and good authentication does not cover all of your potential security concerns. Very much the same thing with MSP tools. And the actual vulnerability here was the server setup page. And you can see this here. Our next slide is a live demo, and we'll actually walk through this. But the server setup page was accessible by appending some extra data to the URL. And at that point, you can reset the admin password. From there, or admin on a ScreenConnect server with thousands of devices. That's where the attacks begin. And as we're going to cover in some subsequent slides, this is a little tricky to defend against because normally speaking, you're not asking your security stack to block password resets. That's normally not a typical attack vector. So with that, let's take a look at this in action. Here is a vulnerable ScreenConnect server. You can go ahead and refresh, and if we look at this here, you can see our header version is 21.4. So this is a few years old and is definitely vulnerable. It's probably already in my URL bar, but we can go to the setup wizard and just append an extra slash, and we're at this welcome screen. And we can click next. You can type in an email and a password, and then you'll hit next. It should pre-populate the license, and ta-da, you are now admin on the ScreenConnect server. That's basically how the vulnerability played out. Since we're talking about defending ScreenConnect, it's now time for the fun part of the demo where we pull out Metasploit and we start to go ahead and load in the modules and get started. Go ahead and get our module loaded up. You can look at the options. It defaults to plain text 8040. It's going to deploy an in-memory interpreter payload, and that is pretty normal. So first things first, we're going to point to that local machine unproxied, and then we'll run the check option. Down there at the bottom, it says that the target appears to be vulnerable and gives us the version number running on Windows. Next, we're going to switch to our proxied instance. I'll actually pop these links into chat as part of a live demo here, just to show some of the different features and access controls we can put in at the proxy layer. But if we run the check command, it says that it can't reliably check the exploit. And that's some of just the base hardening that comes through. And at this point, we can go ahead and, it says it can't check the exploitability, but we can try and run the exploit. It will actually come back here and say, hey, it can't determine it. You have to, if you're ready for a bad Star Wars pun, you have to use the force. We'll go ahead and tell it to force the exploit, and we'll try and rerun that through the proxy. And you can see it failed, unexpected reply when initiating the setup wizard. It hit our WAF rule that is blocking this page. Now, just to switch back and walk through the rest of that exploit, we'll switch back to our vulnerable box here. We'll recheck it. And we're back to our pure and vulnerable target. We'll give it the exploit command, and now it's actually going to do something here. So it created the account that uploading the extension is the other CVSS 8.4 vulnerability. And then, ta-da, we have a interpreter session. We'll bust open a shell. Check our host name. We're on that desktop box, it's Windows 10. do a quick who am I? I am NT Authority System. So I now have system level access on the ScreenConnect server. From here, I can do all sorts of bad things. That's where all the attacks start. You've seen write-ups from numerous security vendors about the various attacks and post-exploitation activities that various threat actor groups have done. But that's how you get there. So at this point, we'll go ahead and switch back over. Since we have our WAF data, we were able to collect and scrape together information from real world attacks, and we've crunched some of that to get some numbers as we talk about defense going forward. Because this vulnerability, by and large, is done. You've either patched or you've had a compromise incident. ConnectWise pulled licenses for vulnerable ScreenConnect servers to limit the impact. And so, by and large, this is pretty much done. We actually had one client of ours who had an error with like their MSI installer on their ScreenConnect server and they couldn't install the patch. And it was nerve-wracking for them, not both, but we configured their proxy to only allow their office IP address. We enabled WAF in blocking mode right away. They actually were just a proxy only client at the time. So we quickly plumbed the WAF module for them and stood it up. And so they were able to limp along until they got ConnectWise support to help them with that. They were outside the US, so they had to play with some strange time zones and wait for ScreenConnect support and all that. So that, apart from some fringe situations like that, we're not dealing with this anymore. But the biggest takeaway from our data sets is that if you have a predictable subdomain that's been around for years, like your screenconnect.msp.com or your control.msp.com or anything similar, then that is vulnerable to attack. Our service uses some randomly generated FQDNs. The only attacks we saw, -1, were on those predictable subdomains. And our clients who did see attacks coming through, they had both their random FQDN and their existing FQDN pointed through their proxy service. If you go ahead and compile that data into a scorecard, for 88% of our clients, we stopped the attack at the reconnaissance phase. And it's only a handful who went into additional attack phases, but everybody was patched. That is the silver lining in all of this. But we used some of that other data to make some enhancements to our services that are, some are going to go ahead and drop next week. Let's take a look at that, and then we'll talk about how to implement an overall solution. Like we talked about, all of our clients who saw attacks were patched, but there was a 10-hour period between the attacks starting and the research coming out where the anti-recon technology was the only defense layer there, depending on your configuration. And we add that asterisk in there because we custom tune each proxy to meet the specific needs of the MSP we're deploying it for, and different organizations have different security postures. That total security depends on the client-specific rules and how you use your tools. Just as an example, if you're one of those MSPs who brought your old domain, going through your proxy, and you have clients using your ScreenConnect for remote workforce, something like that, you're not really going to be able to add IP restrictions or anything like that. So you're going to be as wide open as reasonably possible behind that security stack. Whereas if you're an MSP and you're heavy in the Azure world and it's all Azure virtual desktops, then you only have to allow a small IP set to communicate through your proxy to your ScreenConnect, assuming you're not using remote workforce or anything like that. So you have a much smaller attack surface area. We support all of the above with our proxy service and some additional things we'll talk about later. But yeah, this vulnerability for those who hadn't basically allow only IP lists was very minimal. There was such a small attack surface that it really wasn't worth writing home about. You install the patch and don't break a sweat. But for the 12% of our clients who were in the other boat, we wanted to beef up the protections at the proxy WAF layer. So one of those first enhancements was detecting the in-the-wild exploit tools that weren't the dumb bots. WAFs will block all sorts of scanners by default, Nmap, Nessus, any other big name tool, and even some of the more fringe ones. The WAF will see that come across and just flag as malicious, request never gets through. And we actually didn't see too much of like Python scripts or anything like that. What we did see as far as attackers hitting those clients, or trying to hit those clients, they were using more advanced frameworks that were basically impersonating browser requests. But there was one kicker there, and that is they were using masquerading as ancient versions of those browsers. Apart from hitting the setup URL, they were also like using Chrome version 45, which came out in 2015. Once you see that in the logs, it's pretty obvious nobody's using a 9-year-old browser. And you can start to cross-reference and see that, oh yeah, there are, this is a trend in this attack tool set. So enhancement number 1, we have detection for anything that looks like it's going to be a spoofed request. Those rules are in read-only mode right now, and we found across our client base that there are a lot of people with outdated browsers. So yesterday we sent out a notification to all of our clients saying that these rules are going live next week, and you're going to want to patch your browsers. Enhancement number 2 were rules specifically for Metasploit. The technical backend is similar where it impersonates a browser, and we actually haven't seen any in the wild attacks from that Metasploit module. So by the time that was published, most of the dust has settled, and none of our clients have seen that. But we expect in the future, again, thinking about go forward security and upcoming attacks, Metasploit is an exceedingly popular framework, and so we added rules to detect those Metasploit attacks. With that, let's go ahead and discuss how this all ties together in the overall infrastructure. So here we have a diagram with all the layers represented. And individually, a single line item might not do a lot, but in concert, you get a compounding effect that creates a really formidable defense. So we start with wildcard DNS pointed to a proxy running a wildcard certificate. And when you do that, especially if you incorporate a new FQDN, at that point, it's impossible to enumerate the tools that are behind that reverse proxy. What we suggest to most MSPs out there, you can get .tech or .io or .management FQDNs these days. So you can register a new FQDN and set it up greenfield to work this way, and then we can go ahead and swap in your RMM tools behind the reverse proxy. Beyond that, we have GeoIP, HTTP header hardening, and cipher hardening going on at the proxy layer, along with those custom ACLs. And you saw a handful with the chat demo there. There are a few other things that we can go ahead and configure depending on your needs. And again, if you can think it, you can pretty much build it. There are a couple technical limitations, but proxy ACLs are extremely flexible. You also add to the mix the WAF, which is blocking exploits, and that's your OWASP top 10, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, file inclusion, the works. You also have protocol validation, like can I send you a post request without a body, or can I send you a get request with a body and try and make your web application do things it shouldn't? And then you also have the bot protection, looking for those known malicious agents and the payloads that they send. It's also not on the diagram, but with a reverse proxy, we can send all the traffic to syslog, or anything that can receive syslog. That was a concern with this latest round of attacks, just because it's fairly sparse at the application layer in ScreenConnect as far as logging goes. If you're trying to figure out, like, were we impacted by this? Did we have any requests coming from some of those known bad IPs, things like that? We can go ahead and send that traffic out through syslog. And let's see, we have a question, and that is, do we support black point for syslogging? Basically, any IP import that can receive syslog, we can ship to. And the HA proxy format is fairly well understood. It's going to depend on your vendor of choice if they can go ahead and like extract and enhance that data or not, but anything that supports it on the protocol layer, we can go ahead and support. As you'd guess, we can help you get set up with this. Here at Automation Theory, we offer reverse proxy as a service. It's a fully managed service that is designed for MSP tools, including ScreenConnect. We host a proxy out in the cloud, and then we configure your ScreenConnect server to use it. It can provide all the features we've discussed today, and we can spin these up pretty rapidly. It takes us about 30 minutes to get it set up, configured for your ScreenConnect, and integrated into the WAF. Our service eliminates the complexities of managing your own proxy. That's another piece of software. It can have its own vulnerabilities, needs patching, maintenance, etc. And you can use the same proxy for a number of applications that you might be self-hosting. There's no additional cost per application. We size the proxy per node, which can support, and each node can support about 5,000 remote agents. If you are a larger MSP, if you have more than 5,000 endpoints, or if you just like to have an HA fault-tolerant cluster, we can configure that too. And we have another question in the chat here about the hosted ScreenConnect. Hosted ScreenConnect still is not going to play nice with the proxy service. Right now, we're actually working on hosted automate. So we'll go ahead and keep you posted as things progress there. But it's a lot more interesting when you're trying to proxy over to a SaaS application. Likewise, we offer WAF, and that just bolts on to the proxy service there. And just like the proxy, it's fully managed, designed for MSP tools, and we handle all of the backend and the rule tuning. And that is important because WAFs are known to have a high number of false positives. Over the summer, CISA released guidance for MSP tools, and they said you should use a WAF, but they actually line itemed in there. But WAF rule tuning is a pain and requires a lot of work. They're not wrong there. MSP tools, especially with the type of payloads you're sending, like PowerShell commands through ScreenConnect, any WAF worth its salt is going to eat that. When you paste and hit send into your web UI, it should start to flag for shell injection rules. And if it doesn't, your WAF probably isn't working the way you think it should. We've gone through and built a tuned rule set, and we continuously monitor everything that triggers for the WAF on our end. We're continuing to add exclusions for false positives. So typically within 24 to 48 hours, if something didn't work in your ScreenConnect, it should start working. And that's just our team on the back end going ahead and tuning those rules. The service is super easy to deploy. And let's take a look at probably the most common deployment scenario that you're going to run into. Here we have a typical ScreenConnect instance. And to proxy it correctly, we need to separate the web traffic from the relay traffic. The relay is what your client devices use to communicate with the server. And of course, the web UI is the website that you log into and what your various integrations use to launch ScreenConnect, whether that's ConnectWise Automate, ConnectWise Manage/PSA, or any other third-party tool, RMM, that you might be using with ScreenConnect. To split that off, we can either change the web FQDN, which is good for your overall security posture, like we talked about, not handing out your attack surface with every business card. The other thing you can do is you can actually change the relay address. If for whatever reason you know that moving that web FQDN is going to be an exercise in futility, it's been out there for so long, you've got clients using it and it just will not move, we can update the relay. It's easier than you might think. It does require a reinstall of your agents, but that happens automatically, or should happen automatically, when you patch your ScreenConnect. Of course, after this latest vulnerability, everything is already patched and up to date. So it might take a little bit, a few extra clicks to get those reinstalls done. But those are the two methods to split the traffic off. Then after that, once you decide on your deployment methodology of how you want to do it, it's just a matter of getting your new FQDNs, configuring the proxy for the certificates, and then updating your ScreenConnect config. So with that, the rest of our time is open for questions here. What do you have? Give everybody a couple minutes there. So some other common questions that we've gotten would be lead time for provisioning proxies, and we can do it within 24 hours. There is a trial request form on our website. If you fill out the trial request, we will spin you up infrastructure, and we do see the little message in there. So if there are any specific questions you have, you can pop that in there. We have a self-service quote form on our website, and you can also use that to go ahead and request a quote. It will be either for the proxy or the WAF, not both. We will go ahead and add the other service to your quote and get that update sent out to you. We have a question in the chat about viable alternatives for zero trust. You can actually mix and match with the proxy service here, depending on the particulars. If you have a proxy, let's say you're both an Automate and ScreenConnect shop, your agents are obviously going to need to communicate with your Automate server. So you'd have a reverse proxy for that agent traffic, and then you can route your humans to your applications however you want to. What I would note about the zero trust, it's kind of ironic, but you actually do start to trust the applications or the endpoints, because the WAF is sitting there, it's watching for SQL injections, it's watching for various access rules, things like that. And then when you fire up zero trust, you're now tunneling around all of your security controls implemented at the proxy layer. So if you actually do trust that endpoint, it's fine. That's a personal deployment kind of case-by-case basis per MSP. Do you actually want that, or do you want to force all the traffic to go ahead and go through the proxy and WAF and be scanned? Let's see. Our next question comes from the background of the X-forwarded for headers. The question here is, does it work to go ahead and have X-forwarded for processed by ScreenConnect? The answer is, right now, it doesn't, but we're also in the background, and we don't have a timeline on it yet, but we've talked with ScreenConnect support, and we're in the process of building an extension that will go ahead and take that header and rewrite it and integrate it into the application so you see the correct IP address. So that too is one of those trade-off questions where, yes, obviously for auditing purposes, you do want inside the application to see the true IP address. But do you want your ScreenConnect server to be naked on the internet just so you can see those true IPs? Or would you combine a syslogging with a reverse proxy to correlate beforehand? Again, there's no right or wrong answer to that, but that's where the technology currently sits. As I mentioned, we don't have a timeline on that, but we do have an open ticket for that right now. The next question is about the reverse proxy. Does GeoIP, it's a relationship between the proxy and the WAF, like what layer handles what. So the reverse proxy is essentially the camouflaging and the access controls. So the reverse proxy gets you out of code. It does GeoIP, your header hardening, your TLS hardening, and the custom access controls. So if you wanted to set up IP lists, or if you wanted to go ahead and you can do certificate-based authentication with a reverse proxy, which is certificates in the browser, not the device, which gets people. Or if you wanted to, for let's say the host access page, if you're trying to read off the clients, hey, go to this page, and let's say you have your whole ScreenConnect IP'd off, what we could do, we could set a URL parameter to jump over your IP restrictions to go ahead and let clients, like if you had a URL shortener, you could read them off with the phone. The shortened URL, it would expand out with your access token in the URL to land them over your IP restrictions and get them to ScreenConnect. The WAF is what is doing the deep inspection and is looking for SQL injections, looking for requests going to pages that it shouldn't, looking for scanning tools, looking for like malformed HTTP. Like what happens if I send a request to the login page, but I don't actually include a username or password? Like, can I try and fuzz various things? And that's what the WAF is doing. And that's really how the service is split. WAF is an add-on for our services because we created the proxy first. And then a couple years later, ConnectWise said, we're going to create a WAF. And then about 3 months later, they backpedaled and said, it's actually more complex than you think. And we dusted off some prototypes we had, and within a month, we had a beta product. We built it out. It became the product you have today. So moving right along here, is there a problem with running the relay traffic through the reverse proxy too? Or is there no point to it? And the answer is both. The reverse proxy can handle the relay traffic in theory. It can take packets coming in on this port and IP and send it to your ScreenConnect server, just the same. Now, the relay sessions are held open, which is why ScreenConnect seems to launch instantly and why the command processing is so fast. It's just a continuous, always-on TCP tunnel. When either you make changes to the reverse proxy config and you need to reload the service, or if you go ahead and if there's ever a flap with the service and it just restarts, then those sessions are interrupted. And it tends to happen at inopportune times. So you'd have like techs on the phone trying to use ScreenConnect, working with the client, and then all of a sudden they're sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes before it reestablishes its connection, almost like if you had restarted the service on the server itself. That gets awkward and causes friction pretty quick. It's also worth noting that the relay traffic is a custom ConnectWise protocol. It is encrypted at the application layer, but it's not HTTP. We can't scan it. We can't really protect against it. And so we always recommend sending that traffic into the server directly just for the quality of life. It also gets you around some other kind of common scenarios, maybe with GeoIP, where let's say you have a VP at a client and they are on vacation in Mexico and they want to get their VPN connected. Well, if you don't have Mexico open in your GeoIP rules, your ScreenConnect would still work. So their automate agent will show offline, but hey, you can launch ScreenConnect and get connected to their computer and still offer support because the relay traffic is still coming in from anywhere. And then we have some self-service options for enabling IPs, or you can always cut a ticket to our support to go ahead and like open an entire country. So that just nicely gets around some of those daily operational issues. The next question is, someone already had a WAF and a reverse proxy running. Is there documentation of the calls that need to be used and released? The answer is ConnectWise doesn't have any documentation there for any of their products. So it very much is black box reverse engineering. My background is in software development, and so we slice the angle, or we slice it from both ends, obviously. So we are a certified integrator. We have a bat phone to ConnectWise support, or sorry, ConnectWise development. We have an 8-hour SLO, so I can get a hold of development faster than most partners can get support. So if there ever was a hiccup with our products, we can get that taken care of very quickly. And also our products, as you can see there, are designed like a circuit breaker. So if there ever was an upstream issue, all you would really do is change your firewall rules to allow traffic directly back in through your firewall. And then you would go ahead and update DNS or use your old FQDN until we get that issue resolved. Beyond that, it's both a process of sending all of the traffic to logging stacks and observing like what happens when you click this button, which we use in both development and support cases, along with reverse engineering the code base for that last mile of those strange scenarios where it doesn't quite work right and you're not sure why. That brings us to the end of our question list here. Anything else out there? We have a couple minutes left while you're thinking about that. As far as our service goes, you can find pricing out there on our website. But we are planning soon in the future to go ahead and upgrade our proxy service and leverage the enterprise modules from HA Proxy. We're working on getting licensing for that from them. And so there'll be a few additional features and some restructuring of our service to go along with that. And it includes a full self-service portal. So that is something that is very exciting. Right now, we do have a self-service API out there for managing your proxy instance. We will keep you all posted as those features progress. One other question we get is just around agreement structure. All of our services are month to month. There's no aggressive contract terms or anything like that. If you decide a year and a half down the road that you're changing RMMs and you don't need this extra security stack anymore, we're not going to force you to keep paying for a service that you're not using. It doesn't look like there are any other questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you soon.